Andy, thanks so much for joining the Ben Shapiro Show.
Thank you so much for having me on and spending time talking about the story of Jussie Smollett with your listeners. I really admire that when you were just 19, you confronted Al Sharpton about Tawana Brawley, and I feel like there's some deja vu with these Smollett allegations.
Well, Andy, as a journalist, you've been following the Jussie Smollett allegations. For people who missed the story, basically, Jussie Smollett claimed that he was walking home at 2 a.m. from a subway, and he was accosted by two guys who proceeded to shout the F word and the N word at him and say he was the star from Empire, loop a rope around his neck, throw bleach on him, shout, "This is MAGA country," and then break or bruise his ribs. At which point he apparently got up, still holding his Subway sandwich, went home, did nothing for 40 minutes, called the police, refused to turn over his phone. Andy, can you kind of take us through his story and how it changed over time? Because he's changed his stories a bunch of times, and now there's breaking information. So we'll get to the breaking information in a second. First, let's give the background. How did Jussie Smollett's story change over time?
So the story was reported by TMZ, and the story broke days after the whole Covington story fell apart. And the initial claims by a source close to Jussie is that he was viciously attacked by masked men who were supporters of Donald Trump, who made a reference to "this is MAGA country" and made homophobic and racist slurs against him. I mean, for me, when I first heard this story, I was just, it seemed a little bit, it was too outrageous for me to just take at face value, because the description of these suspects were so cartoony. It was kind of like if somebody who didn't know much about a Trump supporter was trying to imagine what they would be like, this is what that narrative sounded like. His story started to have to spur some doubts in public opinion when, the first time when he spoke about this incident at a concert that he performed at, I thought it was strange that he read from a card. It just didn't seem like how somebody would respond naturally as a victim. And then he also hired an expensive crisis PR firm that also represented accused sexual predator Harvey Weinstein. He allegedly had bruised ribs but was able to perform and sing at a concert. So these are like important little things that just made me skeptical of it. Over the past 24 hours, the story has kind of really fallen apart, because now the Chicago police have two men who have been arrested, and they apparently, according to reports, know him personally, and one of them was on the show Empire. So this whole the phantom suspects of these Trump supporters who were white, that's fallen apart.
And we do have pictures of the suspects, both of whom are of Nigerian descent, both of whom were who were extras on the show on which Jussie Smollett appeared. Both of them were apparently gym friends with him, so they knew him. And there were rumors going around that the way that they had originally been identified by Chicago PD is apparently via, at least in part, the phone logs of Jussie Smollett himself. So, Andy, you're a journalist, but you also happen to be a gay Asian man. Was there anything about this story? I mean, you suggest that from the very beginning this seemed outrageous to you. As a gay Asian man, a gay minority in the United States, how often do you think that number one, these sort of hoaxes take place, and number two, how often do you think that hate crimes of such an obvious and over-the-top nature are a reality? Do you think that's happening very much?
So if this turns out to be a hoax, as local media reports, I think it really illustrates how sick our society is, how ill we are. We've come to a place where we really worship victimhood and place more value in it than being heroic or charitable or kind. And as somebody who happens to be gay, I particularly resent that minorities are being encouraged to be fragile and bitter. And I think this country is in the middle of a race panic. There's been race panics in the past. In the 90s, there was claims that black churches in the South were being burned by white supremacists. That was untrue. We have the data on hate crime statistics from the FBI, and the numbers are very low for this country's population size. But even if you look at the demographics of the offenders, it does complicate the intersectionality narrative. Blacks are overrepresented as victims, but as offenders as well. And my emotional response to how this story has played out is that I'm particularly critical of the leftist politicians and writers who exploited the incident to smear the character of this country and their fellow Americans. And I find that offensive coming from a family of refugees. If you go on my Twitter, I've chronicled some of the hateful things that people have said when the story first broke. And it just shows that we have a lot of narcissists in power who apparently have really black hearts.
Well, Andy Ngo is a journalist and photographer, editor at Quillette, and he's been following the Jussie Smollett story really closely. Andy, thanks so much for your insight. Thanks for following the story so closely. And thanks for being skeptical, because apparently everyone who is skeptical is now considered a racist until further notice. So I appreciate you doing the hard work out there, my friend.
Thank you for having me on.